Sam Bradford threw a TD pass to Kyle Rudolph. Marcus Sherrell's returned a punt for a score, and Minnesota snapped the Panthers. Listen to this. 14-game home winning streak with a 22-10 win in Charlotte. The 3-0 Vikings put the pressure on the league's reigning MVP, intercepting Cam 3 times, sacking him 8 times, the second most ever against Newton. Bradford improves to 2-0 as the Vikes starter in a year removed from the Super Bowl. The Panthers are 1-2. Max, how surprised were you with Carolina's loss?
Not surprised.
Really?
Not surprised at all. The Vikings defense is that good. They're giving the Broncos run for best defense in the NFL. Let's look at what they've done so far. What they've done to the reputations of opposing quarterbacks. Think about Mike Zimmer for a second, who's along with Peterson and Belichick every year, coach of the year so far, right? Those are the 3 candidates. Mariota. Stephen A., do you remember how they put it on Mariota week 1? To the point that people thought that ship had sailed, Mariota or Winston. Come on, Mariota's not in Winston's class. I'm the one saying let's put the brakes on that. Mariota just played the Vikings defense. It's way too early to say that that ship has sailed. It's unclear who's going to ultimately be regarded as the better quarterback between Mariota and Winston. That's the kind of damage that defense can do to a quarterback's reputation. Very next week, it's like, oh, Mariota's back in the discussion with Winston. Next week, Aaron Rodgers. Is Aaron Rodgers in decline? First, they knock Mariota after week 1 out of the Winston discussion. Then the following week, the best quarterback maybe ever. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is on a very short list. Is he in decline? And I sat here, Stephen A., trying to patiently explain to you that this is what Zimmer defenses do to Aaron Rodgers. This is the history.
You did.
His history against Aaron Rodgers. And now Cam Newton. Are the Panthers in trouble? Look at Cam Newton. 1 rushing touchdown, 3 interceptions. The same Panthers that you picked to win the Super Bowl, the same Panthers that got to the Super Bowl last year after tearing through the NFC last year and the playoffs, this Vikings defense, this Zimmer defense, is so devastating. It is literally, temporarily ruining the reputations of elite quarterbacks where the world should know better. Is Mariota going to be good? Yeah. Is Aaron Rodgers the best? Yeah. Is Cam Newton elite? Tier 1, Stephen A.? Of course. Just not against the Vikings. I was not surprised.
I was shocked. I'm not going to lie. Not because of Minnesota's defense. I expected it to be a rough and rugged game.
So did I.
I did not expect Cam Newton to get sacked 8 times. I did not expect Everson Griffin to just dominate Michael O'Hare. He had 3 sacks on his own. I did not expect, for Kelvin Benjamin, who was out last year, who's your #1 wideout, to basically have nothing going on for himself, Max Kellerman. This dude, Kelvin Benjamin, do you realize that Kelvin Benjamin yesterday afternoon did not even have a catch? Not 1 catch. Do you realize that Kelvin Benjamin not only did not have a catch, but was only targeted once? You don't expect that. Especially Jonathan Stewart's out. You're thinking that they're not going to be able to do anything with the rush. But Payne with Whitaker combined for 69 yards on 17 carries. So based on that, and a Kelvin Benjamin penalty, had a 56-yard TD, catch and run call back, you expect that, okay, with the running game being relatively decent, they'll be able to do something if you can protect Cam Newton. The problem is they couldn't protect Cam Newton. That was one of the problems. The other problem is this. You look at Minnesota, they deserve a lot of credit because their defense is elite. But one of the trepidations that we have about them is that we're thinking, what is Sam Bradford going to be able to do for you? He only passed for 171 yards yesterday. He was effective in the second half, and he deserves credit for that. But it's not like he had some knockout game. The defense won this game for the Minnesota Vikings because they basically punked the Carolina Panthers. Let's just call it what it is. They punched them in the face, dared them to do something about it, and they had absolutely positively no answer whatsoever. I expected the defense to be formidable. Formidable enough where it was a close game, something like 20-17 or something along those lines. I did not expect them to completely rattle and dominate Carolina's offense to the point where we did at home, by the way, and Molly just mentioned at home. Carolina at home, 679 days since they had lost the game. Now, y'all gonna think I'm reaching here, but I'm not. I really feel this way. Protest outside before the game, protesters trying to block folks from coming into the game,
distraction,
all of the stuff that was going on this week. They're professionals, so no excuses, but factors.
They're human. You're human.
Yeah.
You know what? I got to say this, though. I understand that as you talk about, like, a neat narrative, that works as a narrative. But they were on the road, Minnesota was, against the NFC champs. And it's one thing if they just pounded them from the beginning. They were down 10. They start that game
early.
Sure, early, but down 10 against the NFC champs. You could see a team, you test their mettle. They come all the way back, score all those unanswered points.
Yeah. But
on the road.
Wait. You know better. And what I mean by that is this. When you are distracted from your regular routine, when you've got other things that you deal with, it's not what you do in the immediacy. It's what you do over the longer period of time. It's almost like fighting somebody or being in, any kind of competition. It's about the marathon, not the sprint. You can hit somebody quick, but unless you knock them out, you've got to deal with the prolonged battle. And that's where those distractions come into play. And I think it's not the total reason, because Minnesota's defense is why they won.
And that's the point. It was Minnesota that got dropped in that fight early, picked themselves off the deck, and didn't quit. Now, you could say the opponent they were facing maybe had more give than normal. Minnesota had to dust themselves off and win that game.
Minnesota didn't have all of this stuff to deal with.
Yeah, tremendous win. I don't want to take any credit away from them, but I feel like that could have been a factor. And speaking of that subject, when we come back, his national anthem protests have started a growing trend around sports, but is Colin Kaepernick on the bench in San Francisco because of it? You don't want to miss that discussion when First Take returns. Stay here.
I think it's an issue. You look at what's gone on in Tulsa and Charlotte in the last 2 nights. It's an issue that's a forefront of our country, and it needs to be addressed and needs to be taken care of, because what's going on is not right. So, I think, again, he's shedding light on a situation that is heinous and shouldn't happen in this country. I think we all have inalien rights as a citizen of this country, and they're being violated, and that's what I think Colin is standing up for.
It certainly is, and it shouldn't happen. Last week, that was Chip Kelly supporting Colin Kaepernick in his right to protest. Meanwhile, on the field, the Niners dropping to 1-2 as Blaine Gabbert continues to struggle. He's last in the league in yards per attempt. Stephen A., at this point, is it safe to say the reason that Colin Kaepernick is not starting for this team is because of those protests?
I think it's safe to say that that's a factor. To summarily dismiss that as a possibility, I think, is foolhardy, to say the least. Let me say this before I even go any further. I appreciated Chip Kelly's comments. They were somewhat surprising considering his history in Philadelphia. It wouldn't surprise me at all, however, if he thought it was apropos and convenient to take that position, because what other position could he take after the way he suffered in Philadelphia in terms of image because of the things that players had said about him and his failure to ingratiate himself with them? How are you going to go to San Francisco and then speak out against Colin Kaepernick? That wouldn't help you at all. And I think he's wise enough to know that. Not to say that it was disingenuous what he said. I'm just saying it gave me cause to pause, and I'll leave it at that. What I will say, however, in terms of Colin Kaepernick not starting, Blaine Gabbert is completing 55% of his passes. Blaine Gabbert's got 3 interceptions and just 3 touchdowns on the season. Blaine Gabbert ain't knocking anybody's socks off. What's the urgency in keeping him as the quarterback? As my man Chris Carter religiously said, Blaine Gabbert stinks. I won't go that far, but damn it, he ain't that impressive. So why not start Colin Kaepernick? That question leads me towards Chip Kelly's history in this respect. Whether he supports Colin Kaepernick or not, whether those players like LaShawn McCoy and others calling him out when they called him out in Philadelphia were legitimate or not is irrelevant. What is relevant is what Chip Kelly is known for, and that is this. Chip Kelly doesn't like anything distracting you from what he believes your goals should be. And it's football. He wants to monitor your conditioning. He wants to monitor your diet. He wants to monitor your lifestyle. He wants to so much so that dudes, literally, I had a couple of dudes tell me that Chip Kelly came to them when they were in Philadelphia. So, well, did you get enough sleep last night? Oh, yeah. Well, how was that possible when you had this person come over your house?
Creepy.
I mean, listen, this is what they told me. This is what they told me, which is why I came on the air, Max, and said what I said about Chip Kelly, because they were telling me these things. So I say all of that to say, Colin Kaepernick, albeit for what some would believe to be an incredibly admirable cause, in the end, it's a distraction from the field of play in the eyes of somebody like Chip Kelly, potentially. And if that is the case, it has me thinking as to why this man isn't starting for you. I'm not saying it's the only reason by any stretch of the imagination, but don't tell me that that has no factor whatsoever into why Colin Kaepernick is a reserve to Blaine Gabbert.
Precisely what I intend to tell you. It's precisely what I'm going to tell you. And I know it's not like, by the way, I've had a full-throated, not only defensive Colin Kaepernick, but support for his position since day one.
Yep.
You check the tape.
Yes, true.
And not to sound like the naive white guy who's out of touch here, but the fact is it has, to my eye, no bearing, his political stance so far, on whether or not he's starting. Look, all this stuff predates his anthem protest. Let's not forget, he lost the job last year, and he'd been in decline for several seasons, Colin Kaepernick. When they hired Chip Kelly, I thought, oh, look at this. They're hiring Chip Kelly to save Kaepernick. They want to use Kaepernick. And yet, because Chip Kelly, who studied Kaepernick, watched him when he was at Nevada and ran the kind of offense he wanted to run, and on paper looks like the kind of quarterback that Chip Kelly would love to have, who he didn't have in Philadelphia. Boy, this is going to be an interesting marriage. The Niners are really showing their once upon a time franchise quarterback something. They haven't moved on from him, even though it looked like maybe they had. And Kaepernick started making noise about wanting to leave. And I thought, boy, I don't know if that's that smart. You might lose the locker room doing that. They bring in a coach that looks perfect for you, and because he doesn't immediately award you the job he wants to see, now, before even anything happens, you start talking, making noise about wanting to leave. How are you going to lead the locker room under those circumstances when they're like, this dude doesn't even want to be here? Then he has a dead arm. And then he looks like 50.
Whoa. They say
he had a dead arm.
He had a dead arm.
Which, by the way, actually, to me,
we didn't see that.
Sounds like a cover for a real injury.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
And then he looks like much skinnier. I mean, just walking around in clothes, even with the shirt sleeves, he just looks much skinnier. And so, but you start
and a week later, you said he looked a little buff.
He did. He looked.
Right.
No, a couple of weeks later.
Right.
And so you start to say, okay, I know how stubborn Chip Kelly is, and maybe he's too stubborn, but this Blaine Gabbert thing, Blaine Gabbert's no good. And Colin Kaepernick, not that long ago, was excellent. Don't forget, Jaws was sitting there saying on our air, he might wind up being the best ever. He has that kind of potential, and he wasn't alone in considering Kaepernick all-world, and he took his team to a Super Bowl, which Alex Smith didn't do, #1 overall pick, and then the very next season comes one pass away from taking them to back-to-back Super Bowls. So Kaepernick had that kind of potential, and you knew that Gabbert is going to play as long as Kaepernick is skinny, as long as his arm is dead, as all this kind of stuff, as long as he does want out of town. And Chip Kelly's a little stubborn, may stay with that a little too long. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to say it right now. If this continues, in other words, if Kaepernick remains healthy, if he keeps that mass on, I mean, you saw him with the shirt sleeves cut off, he looks back to being Kaepernick, and this continues with the Niners, I'm telling you right now, Kaepernick will become the Niners' starting quarterback this season, and his political stance does not have to do with this. This predates everything. If anything, I'll say this. His political stance may help him because there are various players now rallying around him, and as you saw at the press conference,
we agree there.
Chip Kelly's standing by.
But we did the debate and the discussion is not about whether or not Colin Kaepernick will eventually start. It's about why he's not starting yet. I would ask you to consider. Again, 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, complete just 55% of his passes. Your leading receiver on this squad is Jeremy Curley, who has 12 receptions in 3 games. That's your leading receiver. In other words, your offense is relatively impotent. Defensively, you have surrendered 83 points in 2 games. And Colin Kaepernick is sitting on the sidelines. I am not saying in any way that all of those points that you advocated, these are things that I've said in terms of him alienating the team, not ingratiating himself with the locker room, players talking about his attitude, et cetera, et cetera. I understand all of those things played a role. Plus, you wanted out once Chip Kelly arrived, which probably rubbed Chip Kelly the wrong way. But I'm speaking about what I have heard about Chip Kelly.
He's stubborn, right?
Wait a minute. It's not just about stubbornness. He wants things done a certain way, and he wants the focus, like most coaches, here. But Chip Kelly is unconventional. And so what happens is that you're one of those guys that could very well have the ability. But if Chip Kelly looks at you and there's something that he doesn't like about you that may not have much to do with football, I've been told it could influence his football decisions. And that's a big deal.
And you have been told by me right now, you are being told right now that all that predated the anthem protest. He wasn't playing because all that before the anthem protest.
Wait a minute, but still in all, you could overcome that leading up to game 1 of the season. But when did the anthem take place? So that's the latest refresher.
Is Chip Kelly stubborn? Is he convinced he's the smartest guy in the room, and in face of all the evidence will still do it his way, right? He's a little slow to catch on when his way isn't working. That's why Kaepernick isn't playing.
And I'm saying to you, he might have been a little bit slow, but that slowness may have been wearing off until the national anthem stuff came up.
That's going to
accelerate
the anthem.
That's the latest.
I'm saying it right now. Will accelerate Kaepernick taking the starting job.
Great debate, but we got to go to break. Can you imagine the Cowboys when they come to town this week in Levi Stadium? If Kaepernick was starting, the hoopla surrounding that game, that would be insane.
Might be starting by the middle of that game.
Right. Coming up.